The year was 1415, and an African empire was about to change the world. On the coast of West Africa, a Portuguese expedition arrived at the fortress of Ceuta, marking the beginning of European exploration along the African continent. But here's what they didn't tell you in school. Africa didn't need discovering. Africa had already discovered itself centuries before. Imagine you're standing in Timbuktu in the year 1500. The city is alive. Scholars from across the Islamic world gather in the great mosques to debate mathematics, astronomy, and philosophy. The University of Sankore attracts students from Egypt, Morocco, and beyond. This wasn't a primitive society waiting for salvation. This was a center of learning that rivaled anything Europe had to offer. Yet when historians wrote about Africa, they erased these moments entirely. We need to talk about the Mali Empire, one of the wealthiest civilizations ever to exist. In 1324, the Emperor Mansa Musa undertook a pilgrimage to Mecca that would echo through history. He traveled with 60,000 people and 80 camels carrying 4 pounds of gold each. His journey was so lavish, so abundant with African wealth that it destabilized the gold markets of the entire Mediterranean region for over a decade. One man's pilgrimage shook the global economy. Think about that. But Mansa Musa wasn't an anomaly. Before him stood other titans. The kingdom of Kush ruled from 2500 BCE to 350 CE, rivaling Egypt in power and sophistication. The Aksumite Empire controlled trade routes worth billions in today's money. Zimbabwe built Great Zimbabwe, a city of stone architecture so precise that European explorers 200 years later refused to believe Africans had constructed it. They invented false theories. They couldn't accept that African civilizations had achieved what they had achieved. This is what we call the African history test. Not a test you take in school, but a test of whether you're willing to see Africa as it actually was, not as colonial powers painted it. For centuries, the dominant narrative told you that Africa was backward, dark, and primitive. The very phrase dark continent was used to describe a land of extraordinary light, culture, and innovation. The darkness was never in Africa. It was in the eyes of those who refused to see. Consider the technology. The people of Nok in Nigeria created sophisticated terracotta sculptures between 1500 BCE and 500 CE with an artistic understanding of human anatomy that wouldn't be matched in Europe for thousands of years. The Ethiopians developed their own written script, Ge'ez, still used in churches today. They were writing, building, creating, trading, and thriving while Europe was figuring out basic agriculture. We have to acknowledge what happened next. When the transatlantic slave trade began in earnest in the 16th century, it wasn't an accident of history. It was a choice made by people seeking profit. Over 400 years, approximately 12.5 million Africans were forcibly transported across the Atlantic. 12.5 million human beings. The economies that built America, the Caribbean, and parts of Europe were constructed on African backs. Yet even then, even in the darkest chapters, African people resisted. They rebelled on slave ships. They escaped to form maroon communities. They fought for their freedom in Haiti, where in 1804, the formerly enslaved people established the world's first black republic. Toussaint Louverture led a revolution that terrified the slave-holding powers of the world because it proved something undeniable. African people were not meant to be enslaved. This is the truth the African history test asks you to confront. You came here thinking you knew African history. You're leaving understanding that everything you've been taught was incomplete at best and deliberately distorted at worst. Africa didn't fail to develop. Africa was deliberately prevented from developing. Africa didn't lack civilization. Africa's civilizations were systematically erased from the historically earth.